There are moments in history that don't announce themselves loudly. They arrive quietly, tucked inside a financial report, buried beneath pages of numbers and legal language. And yet when the world finally understands what those words mean, everything shifts. This is one of those moments. In the summer of 2026, King Charles III did something that no British monarch had done in nearly 2 centuries. He signed off on a decision that ended a tradition started by Queen Victoria herself. And while the headlines focused on palaces and renovations and royal finances, the real story was far deeper than any of that. Because what Charles signed wasn't just about where he would or wouldn't live. It was about what kind of king he intended to be, and what kind of monarchy he was quietly, deliberately, and permanently reshaping for the generations that would come after him. The document in question was the Sovereign Grant Report for 2025 to 2026. On the surface, it sounds dry. It sounds like the kind of paperwork that government clerks file away without a second thought. But buried inside it were 2 announcements that sent shockwaves through the royal world and sparked conversations across Britain and beyond. The first was that even after the completion of the massive Buckingham Palace renovation in 2027, King Charles and Queen Camilla would not be moving in. They would remain at Clarence House, Charles's London home since 2003, ending a royal tradition that had lasted since 1837. The second was perhaps even more quietly radical. The official description of King Charles's constitutional role had been changed, no longer describing him as head of the Church of England and defender of the faith, but instead as a monarch who protects the space for faith within the multi-faith nation. 2 sentences, 2 decisions. And together, they painted a picture of a king who was not simply occupying a throne, but actively redefining what that throne means. Yahoo! Royal Central. To understand why this matters so deeply, you have to go back not just years, but centuries. Buckingham Palace became the official London residence of the British monarchy in 1837, when a young Queen Victoria moved in and made it the beating heart of royal life. Since then, every reigning monarch had called it home, and no British sovereign had ever chosen another permanent London residence, not even Queen Victoria herself, who spent long stretches away from the palace after the death of Prince Albert. The palace had become more than a building. It was a symbol. It was the place where the lights in the window told the public their monarch was home. It was the place where the flag flew and the guards marched and the carriages rolled through those famous gates. It was, for millions of people, what the British monarchy looked like in the flesh. And for nearly 190 years, that never changed. Royal Central. In 2017, the royal household had begun a 10-year program to update the palace's obsolete plumbing, wiring, and heating. A massive £369 million undertaking, roughly equivalent to $487 million, designed to modernize the building and ensure it could house the monarchy for another 50 years. The project was not cheap, and it was not quick. For a decade, the public had watched this renovation unfold, assuming that at the end of it all, a freshly restored Buckingham Palace would become King Charles's home, the natural conclusion to a long and expensive story. Instead, on June 25, 2026, the official royal household statement confirmed that on completion of the resurfacing program, the King and Queen would not make Buckingham Palace a personal residence, reflecting their wish that the palace remain the ceremonial center of royal life, the primary workplace of the royal household, and a national heritage asset with increased opportunities for public access. NPR. Royal family. Read those last few words carefully. Increased opportunities for public access. In a single phrase, the palace, that towering symbol of exclusivity, of monarchy, of a world ordinary people could only glimpse through gilded gates, was being offered back to the public. Not just as a backdrop for ceremonies, not just as a place you could visit for a few hours on a summer tour, but as something more central, more open, more belonging to the nation itself. This was not an accident of language. This was a choice. Charles and Camilla, both in their late 70s, are understood to have been reluctant to undertake the upheaval of relocating themselves and their household to Buckingham Palace. That part is understandable. Moving is difficult at any age. Moving when you are a head of state, with a household and a staff and centuries of protocol to manage, is something else entirely. But the decision was also shaped by something larger than personal comfort. Reports from the Telegraph had already suggested that Charles's health battle had made the move increasingly unlikely, noting that he appeared set to live out his reign at Clarence House. Charles had been fighting cancer since early 2024, and while the palace had consistently maintained that his treatment was progressing well, the physical demands of relocating to a palace that had been under construction for nearly a decade were simply not something his team was willing to take on. Royal Central, AOL, and yet to frame this purely as a health decision would be to miss the bigger picture. Charles had spent his entire adult life thinking about what the monarchy could and should be. Long before he was king, he was a man with strong views, sometimes controversial ones, about the environment, about architecture, about religion, about the relationship between the crown and the people it serves. He was never someone content to simply inherit a role and perform it as written. He was always someone who wanted to reshape it, thoughtfully and deliberately, from the inside. And now, with the Sovereign Grant Report of 2026, the world was finally seeing the full shape of what he had been building. While Clarence House will serve as the monarch's official London residence, Charles will maintain an office at Buckingham Palace, which will remain the administrative headquarters of the monarchy. This is a careful distinction, and an important one. The palace does not disappear from royal life. It remains the place where the king works, where state visits are hosted, where the great ceremonial occasions of British national life take place. But it is no longer home. And that difference, between a place you work and a place you live, says everything about how Charles views the relationship between the crown and the public it serves. Yahoo! Meanwhile, the question of what Buckingham Palace's future might look like has opened up an entirely new debate. One commentator told the Associated Press that he was hoping for a second act to the decision, waiting to see whether a more radical proposal for the palace's future might emerge. Could it become a more fully public institution? A museum? A center for national events? The possibilities are vast, and no firm answers have been given. But what has been made clear is that the building, renovated at enormous public expense, standing at the heart of one of the world's most visited cities, will now be shaped with the public in mind in a way it never was before. NPR. And then there is the second part of the story, the part that in some ways is even more significant than the palace question. Because while the world was debating where the king would live, the Sovereign Grant Report had quietly done something else. It had changed how the king was officially described, and in doing so, it had signaled a fundamental shift in the spiritual and constitutional identity of the British monarchy. Buckingham Palace dropped the phrase "Defender of the Faith" from King Charles's official job description, replacing the 500-year-old title with language describing him as protector of the multi-faith nation. This title, Defender of the Faith, had a history that stretched back to 1521. It was originally granted to King Henry VIII by Pope Leo X. The irony that Henry VIII then broke with Rome and established the Church of England, becoming its head while keeping this papal title, had always made it one of the stranger artifacts of British constitutional history. But for 500 years, it had remained a fixed point in the official description of the monarch's role. Until now. RT International. GB News. The revised wording in the Sovereign Grant Annual Report and Accounts 2025-26 states, His Majesty is Supreme Governor of the Church of England and protects the space for faith within the multi-faith nation. And crucially, despite the revised wording, King Charles has not relinquished the historic title of Defender of the Faith. The title remains one of the monarch's official styles and titles, proclaimed following his accession in September 2022. The formal title lives on in law and tradition, but the language used to describe what the king actually does in the official document that the public and the government use to understand his role has changed. Jewish News. Royal Central. This reflects a position Charles had spoken about for more than 3 decades. In a 1994 television interview while he was still Prince of Wales, he said he saw himself as a defender of faith rather than solely the faith, before later clarifying that his role was to uphold the Church of England while protecting the freedom of people of all religions. For 30 years, these were the words of a prince, thoughtful, perhaps provocative, but ultimately without the force of official policy. Now they are the words of a king, encoded in the formal language of the state. Jewish News. Following his accession in 2022, he told faith leaders at Buckingham Palace that the sovereign has a duty to protect the space for faith itself, alongside Britain's religious diversity. And the word Britain matters here. Britain is not the country it was when Victoria ruled from that palace. It is a nation where Christianity remains the largest faith, but where Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Judaism, and dozens of other traditions are woven deeply into the fabric of daily life. It is a country where the question of what it means to have a state religion, and a monarch who heads it, has grown more complicated with every passing decade. Charles has been watching this shift, and he has been thinking about it for his entire adult life. Jewish news. The king has long built close ties with Britain's Jewish community. Just weeks before the report's release, he visited Golders Green following an anti-Semitic terror attack in which 2 visibly Jewish men were stabbed, meeting community members at the Jewish Care campus. This was not a routine royal visit. This was a king making a personal, public statement about whose faith he considered himself responsible for protecting. Not just the Church of England, not just Christians, everyone. Jewish news. The reactions to these twin announcements were swift and varied. Some praised Charles for his vision, for being willing to break with tradition not out of weakness, but out of genuine conviction. Others expressed concern. Traditionalists worried about what it meant for the Church of England to see its historic relationship with the Crown reframed in this way. The updated wording in the Sovereign Grant report sparked debate, with discussion following the publication of the annual financial review across media and commentators. But debate, it turned out, was exactly what Charles seemed to be inviting. A king who does nothing controversial provokes no conversation. A king who rewrites his own job description, quietly, officially in a financial document, forces the nation to think about who it is and what it believes. Royal Central. There is also the matter of what all of this means for the future. It seems unlikely that Prince William will ever live in Buckingham Palace either. When he and his family moved into Forest Lodge, it was described as their forever home, even after he takes the throne. The decision Charles made is not just about his own reign. It may be setting a template for the reigns that follow. The most famous address in the world, the one that has appeared on millions of postcards, in hundreds of films at the heart of Britain's most celebrated national moments, may never again be a home. It may become something else entirely, something that belongs to everyone. Yahoo! And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps that is what Charles has been trying to say through the careful, deliberate, official language of a financial report that most people would never read. That the monarchy is not a family living behind gates. That the king is not just the guardian of one church. That Britain is not just one thing. It is many things, many faiths, many stories, and the person who wears the crown is responsible for all of them. The announcement may confirm what had been an open secret to insiders for years, but it is a seismic moment which upends a tradition started by Queen Victoria, the king's great-great-great-grandmother. And yet seismic moments, when they arrive through paperwork, have a quiet power that louder announcements often lack. No ceremony, no broadcast, no pageantry, just a document. Just words on a page, officially redefining what it means to be the King of Great Britain, and marking with careful, deliberate ink the end of one era and the beginning of something new. The Daily Beast. History will decide whether these were the right decisions. Whether opening Buckingham Palace more fully to the public was an act of democratic generosity or a diminishment of royal mystique. Whether reframing the monarch's role as protector of all faiths was a wise recognition of modern Britain or a step too far away from ancient foundations. But what history will not be able to dispute is that Charles made these decisions intentionally, at an age when most men would simply be content to sit still, and that he did so by signing his name to a document that changed, in ways both symbolic and real, the shape of the crown he carries.